I'm Brandi. Kruse. Coming up today on Undivided, President Donald Trump helps to broker a historic peace deal, but will it last? Our friend Ari Hoffman joins us. Plus, the trash Seattle Times complains about faltering support for local journalism, yet continues to put out shoddy local journalism. Also, you will not believe the work of fiction that ninth graders in a local school district are being asked, or rather told, to read. That and much more coming up today on Undivided. Remember, you can support our show for just $5 a month by signing up at undividedpod.com. That's undividedpod.com. Click on the banner that says support the show. Hello, and welcome to Undivided. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. Wow, what a night, what a morning. First of all, I don't know how President Trump has the energy for it. I was tired just sitting up trying to watch what was happening in the Middle East, and he's just ping-ponging from place to place, doing all sorts of things. Look, I know you don't watch this show for my analysis on what's happening in the Middle East, but I do want to address it briefly at the top of the show and bring in our friend Ari Hoffman for a couple minutes to give his thoughts. The president flying into Israel, making his way to Jerusalem to announce what he is calling a new era of peace for the Middle East.
This is not only the end of a war. This is the end of an age of terror and death, and the beginning of the age of faith and hope and of God. It's the start of a grand concord and lasting harmony for Israel and all the nations of what will soon be a truly magnificent region. I believe that so strongly. This is the historic dawn of a new Middle East.
Yeah, I think all of us can hope so. Those remarks, of course, coming just after the official release of all 20 living hostages that were in Hamas captivity. From there, the president went to Egypt for a larger meeting with world leaders and allies, including, leaders in the Middle East who have helped to broker this deal, and talked about, I think one of the questions here is like, look, Gaza is kind of a pile of rubble right now. So what is the U.S.'s involvement going to be moving forward? Is it going to be nation building? Is it going to just be helping to clean up? Or is it going to be trying to install some sort of government that the West approves of?
Supporting Gaza must be done to lift up the people themselves, but we don't want to fund anything having to do with bloodshed, hatred, or terror, as has happened in the past. And for the same reason, we're also agreed that Gaza's reconstruction requires that it be demilitarized and that a new, honest civilian police force must be allowed to create a safe condition for the people in Gaza.
Yeah, so I think TBD in that regard. A couple things I just want to mention and talk about. Most Democrats, I will say, even Hillary Clinton was on CBS News giving President Donald Trump credit for brokering the deal. I also saw the same from Congressman Adam Smith of our state. So a lot of Democrats are saying, look, President Donald Trump deserves praise here. But it just never ceases to amaze me, the amount of unhinged lunatics who hate Donald Trump so much that they can't give him credit for even something as significant as this, even after they've been, chanting free, free Palestine, end the war and all this stuff. And it's Donald Trump, so they just lose their mind. So as Trump, literally as President Donald Trump is in the Middle East, this historic peace deal, here's what MSNBC is talking about.
Have we slipped already into the authoritarianism? Is there a way out? Give us your unvarnished thoughts here.
Well, listen, we are not on the verge of an authoritarian takeover. We're in the middle of it. Now, it's not too late. We haven't lost our democracy. We have an opportunity in these elections this November to send a signal. We have an opportunity through the protests on October 18th to show the country and the world that we aren't lying down. So this is a serious moment. It's almost lost, but it's definitely not lost yet.
I just don't even, where do you even start? You've got the president of the United States brokering a historic peace deal, talking about trying to give the citizens and humans of this world their agency back. And in the United States, MSNBC and the Democrats are talking about how it's an authoritarian takeover. You really can't make it up. And then probably at this point, the leading contender to be the Democratic nominee for president in 2028, as Trump is doing these great things for the world, what is he doing? Well, of course, he's shitposting on X and making fun of the fact that while President Trump was boarding Air Force One, he couldn't get his umbrella closed. Saying the only thing Donald Trump can keep open these days is an umbrella. I mean, what a small man. Donald Trump is doing these great things for the world, ushering in peace, and he's shitposting on X about Donald Trump not being able to close his umbrella. So it really tells you everything you need to know about the state of the Democratic Party, although I will give an exception to just the one of the only sane Democrats left. Who knew? Senator John Fetterman.
Yeah, our party's different, but this is a big, huge win for peace in this world. And it's entirely appropriate to do that. And if you're not willing to acknowledge that, you're ironically pointing out the absurdity and making it more personal when we can't all celebrate this peace after this awful war after 2 years.
Yeah, that's the sane response. So I do want to bring in our friend Ari Hoffman. Ari is the first person we spoke to on this show after the October 7th attack on Israel 2 years ago. He has been out there to anyone who will listen, talking about the urgent need to bring back hostages, both living and dead. And, you know, I spoke to him a little bit offline this morning before we came on for the interview. And, you know, he definitely has some reservations and some concerns. But overall, he says this is a very good day for peace in the world. Ari, welcome back.
Good to be here, Brandi. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, just generally your state of mind today.
Well, for me, it's happiness. I'm really, really happy because all the hostages, the living hostages, I should say, are coming home. And as a guy who has a son who just went to basic training for the Israeli Defense Forces, I'm really hoping my son doesn't have to go to war. My second son also said he wants to follow in his brother's footsteps, so I'm hoping that I don't have two sons that are going to war. They're ecstatic. They're in Israel right now, as a matter of fact. One of them's in basic, one of them's at school. But the October 6th, Ari, is gone and gone forever. I'm thrilled today. I can breathe a sigh of relief today, but I'm also cautiously optimistic about the future. I'm a little concerned about this peace deal. I'm concerned that Hamas has not returned the 28 dead bodies that they are still holding on to. They were supposed to return them as well. And what we hear, the latest, is that they're only returning 4 today. So the question is, are they already breaking their word? Is the peace deal already in jeopardy?
Yeah, is it that fragile? So you saw President Trump go to Egypt, and, you know, he's so good at the way he talks to and about these leaders. You know, these are leaders in an area of the world where I think the West has often sort of spoken down to them. And I think he has this strategy and this way of speaking to them that really makes them feel like they are part of sort of this greater good. I mean, so is Hamas just too out on an island alone to be able to not keep its word?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Nobody wants to deal with the Palestinians. Nobody wants to take in the Palestinians. If they did, the Arab countries would have taken them in decades ago. And because they don't want to deal with them, because they know that by bringing them in, they're inviting Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, they're saying, we just want to keep them there and we want them to be Israel's problem. Now, for them, it makes more money to pay to rebuild Gaza and try and denazify them if they can. The beauty of the first Abraham Accords was President Trump offered the Palestinians almost everything they wanted. And when they said no, he could go to the Arab countries and say, guys, I tried. They said no. What do you want to do now? It's better to be friends with America. It's better to be friends with Israel than continue this cycle. And that's how you got the first Abraham Accords. This deal, it looks like he's taking the same approach. Guys, I gave a pathway out for the Palestinians where they don't have to leave Gaza, where we can rebuild it. We can make it the Riviera of the Middle East or anything else. And if they turn it down, that's on them. But don't forget, there were 2 conditions to this war ending. One was get the hostages back, and we haven't gotten all of them back. And the second one was Hamas disarmed, so it can't be a threat again. And now it seems like they're refusing to do that.
I mean, but at the same time, there obviously was an agreement to be able to move forward in the way that happened overnight. So do you think that, I guess, why would Hamas make an agreement if they didn't intend on living up to some of the basic tenets of the first phase?
Well, think of some of the things they got in return. They already got back close to 2,000 terrorists. So that's an opportunity to try and rebuild their numbers where they've been completely devastated. In addition to that, they're hoping that through the aid that's coming in, if it's being done by an international group or the UN, they're the ones who always slipped them weapons before. They're hoping they can take this opportunity to rearm. The question is, what's going to happen if it's shown they're doing that, if they continue the attacks? And we see right now, you saw the reports yesterday as the peace deal was unfolding. You see that these clans inside of Gaza are at war with each other, different Palestinian clans killing each other. The civil war is going on there over who's going to control the Gaza Strip. And just because Hamas is gone, it doesn't mean they're not going to be replaced by some other terrorist organization.
So you're not completely sold on this idea of this being peace in the Middle East, so to speak. What would be the sort of benchmark for you where you do feel like this could be lasting? What are you looking for specifically?
Sure. So with the Abraham Accords, you saw that the Emirates and these other countries did business with Israel, did business with the United States, and then embraced it further. For example, there are now more kosher restaurants in Dubai than there are in Seattle, Washington. That's how much they embraced it. So if you see things going in that direction with these other Arab nations, especially Saudi Arabia, especially Turkey, especially Qatar, then that's a good benchmark. If the Palestinians are out on their own little island, then eventually they'll have to come and join in, realizing they don't have friends anymore. By Iran being depleted and it can no longer fund its proxies, and by Israel doing such an effective job taking out Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthi rebels are in retreat, you might actually see peace in the Middle East if the Middle East has decided they've had enough of this.
Yeah, here's the real question. I'll end here. What does the Free Palestine crowd do now? What do they do? I mean, they're clearly not going to give Donald Trump credit, but how do they spin this into their next social justice movement?
Have you noticed they've all been pretty quiet recently? Haven't heard anything from them. I think you're already starting to see it, Brandi, and you know this as well as I do. At the ICE facility down in Portland, they're already redoubling their efforts down there, whether they're in big stuffed critters, whatever the case may be. You're going to see them going harder and harder against ICE because they always need something to protest. And what I'm concerned about is certain colleges that have not yet seen the wrath of the Trump administration up close and personal. They're going to double down not just on the hating America, not just on the hating ICE and hating Donald Trump and hating conservatives, but they're also going to double down on the hating Israel. And what I'm concerned about is what's being bred in those universities, in the public schools, which haven't really seen any of that, in the elementary schools and the middle schools, that's going to tee up the next batch of activists. Just like the Palestinians in Gaza, they're being indoctrinated towards hate in those schools.
Yeah, I saw this great meme. It was Greta Thunberg, and she was looking at Trump. She said, "Free Palestine," and then the next clip, she's like, "No, not you." She's like crying. Yeah, we want a free Palestine. We just don't want Donald Trump to do it. But also some people saying it wasn't about a free Palestine. It was just about hating Jews. So we'll see. Ari, well, I'm happy for you. I'm happy for everyone you love in Israel, and I'm happy for the world. I mean, I agree with you. I'm sort of skeptical of, it's wait and see, but I don't think anyone can argue that today's a good day.
Yeah, I completely agree. And thank you, Brandi, for always covering this kind of stuff and bring the attention to the insanity that's going on in the Pacific Northwest with all the people who, like you said, it seems like they're more intent on just hating Jews than actually solving any world problems. But I appreciate you putting yourself out there and always covering the stuff objectively.
So a big thank you to our friend Ari Hoffman, 570 KVI. I know he'll be talking a lot about this throughout the day. And I think he makes a good point. Now the leftists have lost one thing, presumably, for them to be able to take to the streets and protest over. So then do they put all the effort they were expending on that into hating ICE or some sort of other cause, because they're not just going to do nothing. And of course, they'll find ways to either take credit away from Donald Trump or blame him for some aspects of this. I don't know. But cool thing to see, to witness. And I will also say, again, having been at the White House last week, while this deal was sort of coming together and seeing Marco Rubio come in and whisper in the ear of the president, it was this just fascinating, for me, kind of full circle moment of watching it behind the scenes. So we will obviously track what happens in the hours and days to come. All right, today's one of those episodes where I was laughing my ass off before the show. I'm trying to swear less, even though I've already done it. Because I have to read a perverted book to you. And so I'm going to do it in a little bit. I'm giving you a warning. In like 10 minutes, I have to read a perverted book to you because ninth graders are going to have to read this perverted book. So I'm giving you plenty of an advanced warning that, I wouldn't have kids in the room while I read this perverted book. Unfortunately, kids are going to have to read the perverted book because their schools are so whacked out. But that's my 10-minute warning to you before I read the pervy book. First, really great segue into our wonderful sponsors with Valentine Roofing. Sorry, Valentine, sometimes the segue isn't going to be great. Our newest sponsors to the Undivided podcast, make sure that you support the local businesses that support us. So obviously, if you probably know, hey, is your roof on its last legs? Homeowners, that's one thing they're always, I think, dreading is the day they're going to have to replace their roof. What you don't want to do is wait until the heavy rain hits. So Valentine will give you a free roof assessment. Here's the best part. If your roof can be repaired, they're just going to fix it. They're not going to push you into buying a new roof. But if you do need a new roof, if it's leaking now, for instance, Valentine offers a free leak stop. They'll make sure your leaks are fixed so no further damage happens. Then they'll replace your roof. And by the way, they also do siding, gutters, attic insulation, exterior cleaning. You can expect the same great service. And for those roof projects, they offer zero down for most projects. So if you can get the work done, pay over time, which is also sort of a nice stress reliever when that big expense comes up as a homeowner. So schedule your free estimate by calling 206 Roofing. Again, call 206 Roofing, and please tell them you heard about them on Undivided. I'm going to get some call like, hey, Brandi, can you not lead into our ad spots by talking about perverted books and children? I'll try my best. First, I feel like we need an extended edition of our favorite news segment. The Seattle Times is just straight trash. All right, I actually have 3 Seattle Times stories to talk to you about today on the theme of the Seattle Times being trash. So first of all, just as an overarching theme, the Seattle Times has done more reporting on what the big bad wolf Donald Trump might do to Seattle than they've done lately on what Seattle has done to itself. And so there's all this fear-mongering and hand-wringing over, and I'm okay with the news talking about, is Donald Trump going to send National Guard troops, could he, to Seattle? Even though he hasn't even said he's going to do that. And so a lot of it is just this made-up sort of fear-mongering over what might, what could, whatever. And they're just covering it ad nauseum. But here's a story that just shows that the Seattle Times has no interest in being factual and being nuanced, just vilifying conservatives. The headline, Why GOP backs Trump troop deployments, some hope Seattle is next. On social media, the Washington State Republican Party has regularly accused Seattle leaders of condoning lawlessness, because they do, and tagged the U.S. Justice Department, FBI Deputy Secretary, Attorney General, and other Trump leaders in its posts. At times, the party's messaging has taken on a tattling tone, pleading for Trump to unleash federal troops or federal law enforcement on Seattle, as he has done in other Democrat-led cities, including Portland, Los Angeles, and Chicago. The White House on Wednesday hosted a roundtable on what it dubbed Antifa violence in Portland, an event that included former local TV journalists Jonathan Cho and Brandi Kruse, who heaped praise on the president. Kruse, a former Q13 Fox reporter who now hosts her own podcast and stumps for Republican causes, thanked Trump for designating Antifa a terror organization and for bringing, quote, the full weight of the federal government to bear, saying it would save lives. Now, a couple things. First and foremost, I would say when you say that I stump for Republican causes, do I speak at a lot of Republican events? Sure, I do. But what do I speak about? Gosh, I don't know. Parental rights, law and order, supporting law enforcement, reducing taxes, keeping boys out of girls' sports. So is the Seattle Times saying that those are strictly Republican causes? Gosh, because that's quite the admission, isn't it? I stump for causes I believe in. The party that supports them is completely irrelevant to me. But to a broader sense, so they invoke my name in this article about, Republicans backing Trump troop deployments. Clearly, the Seattle Times didn't reach out to me for comment and hasn't watched my show at all in the last 3 weeks because, as you guys know, I have repeatedly and forcefully rejected the idea of National Guard troops coming to the city of Seattle. I do not want the federal government, specifically troops, be they National Guard or active duty military, being used in a law enforcement capacity in American cities without cooperation and coordination with those cities and leadership. D.C. was different because there's different laws that govern that in D.C. where the president can usurp the police force there. As bad as I think Portland and Seattle are, as much as I think they could benefit from armed members of the military on every corner, that's not the United States. That's not the American way. And voters of Seattle and Portland overwhelmingly don't want it. And if they don't want it, well, then they don't get it, even if it might be beneficial to them. Yeah, that clip doesn't fit the Seattle Times narrative as they're trying to paint Republicans as wishing a troop deployment on Seattle and shoehorn me in there. And I'm fine with them quoting me, but you're including me in the context of a story that says that the GOP is egging on a troop deployment to Seattle when I have probably no less than half a dozen times said I would not support some sort of broad deployment of National Guard troops or active duty military to the city of Seattle, even if I think it could be helpful. Now, I have said that I believe the federal government has a right to protect federal agents and assets, especially in cities like Seattle and Portland and Chicago, when clearly the police departments are being told by their political overlords that they're not allowed to protect buildings in the city limits that might belong to the federal government, or they're not allowed to come to the aid of federal agents. So if the Seattle Times, fine, include my name in there, talk about what I said to the President of the United States, but probably worth noting that, one, I'm not a Republican. I'm very forcefully against any sort of party affiliation. So you're putting me under the umbrella of that by saying I stump for Republican causes. No, I stump for common sense causes. And it's actually very telling that they all align with what Republicans in the state of Washington want. So that's more of an indictment of the Democratic Party. And you could at least A, make an effort to watch my show, or B, I don't know, reach out to me for comment before you invoke my name without telling the full story about what I've said about troop deployments in the city. But that, of course, would be asking too much of the trash Seattle Times. So speaking of, as if that weren't bad enough. So I get pinged yesterday about this. Have you seen this op-ed in the Seattle Times? It is the most devoid of self-awareness thing I've ever seen printed in the Seattle Times. And that is absolutely saying something. So Briar Dudley is a columnist that writes about media. He writes about the press in a column for the Seattle Times. This is what he put out yesterday. Save the press, but don't say, quote, democracy. So in it, he talks about this new report. He said it was drafted to help the news media build public support. And it says that talking about democracy triggers people nowadays because they're so burned out on partisan politics. He writes, even though people know how important local news is to our form of government, they're tired of hearing the D word, according to Words That Matter, a toolkit for newsrooms. The report says, here's the paradox. 93% of people believe reliable local news is necessary for democracy. Yet many of these same people react negatively to explicit democracy messaging. So basically, this report's trying to figure out how do we build support and trust in local newsrooms at the time when it's at an all-time low. And they say, well, talk about the importance of local news and information, but don't say it's critical to our democracy. Don't use the word democracy because that turns people off. And in this column, Briar Dudley is just befuddled by this because he really thinks that democracy right now is in peril. And how can we not use the word democracy when we're talking about the importance of propping up local journalism? Now, there's a couple of reasons. One, I'll say that's just obvious. It's very clear why people are sick of hearing democracy is in peril. Because that's all the media and Democrats have been saying since Donald Trump came down the escalator at Trump Tower, is our democracy is in peril. And somehow here we still are, our country intact. And so you might be annoyed that people have gone sort of cold on threats to our democracy, but you're the ones who brought that about because you cry wolf. And every time a Republican does something you don't agree with, you say it's a threat to our democracy. So yeah, I understand why people might not react well to you trying to push, support for local journalism, because if not, it's a threat to our democracy. Like, we're over it, right? He goes on to write, polling by the report's authors no doubt reflects the weird spell that half the country is under after a decade-long attack by the current president on the press and other pillars of D-word. The success of that war on accountability shows up in other surveys. Pew Research Center found more than half of Republicans now believe most journalists are dishonest, elitist, and biased. I doubt euphemisms will change their mind or prevent them from being triggered. So, okay, wrap your mind around this. So this is a media columnist who's talking about how we need to save local journalism. It's so important to the survival of democracy. And at the same time, he is attacking, vilifying, and shaming half the country. And saying, they think that we're snobs and elitist. Well, yeah, we do. because you say that we're going to be triggered if you use the word democracy. And you say that we're under a weird spell. How do you think that's going to endear us to your cause of saving local journalism? Why do you think you're in such a predicament in the first place, Breyer? It's because there's a huge segment, probably not 50% in Washington state, because we're pretty blue. But he did get almost 40% of the vote here. So there's a pretty big segment of the state, millions of people who you just give the middle finger to and look down on every single day. And say, we're triggered, and we're under some weird spell. Why do you think that your subscriptions are plummeting? Why do you think that the newsroom can't make money? It's because you've decided that 40% of the state, that you're too good for them. That they are beneath you. He goes on to end the article. Oh, not just that they're fascists. He says, I'm grateful to Press Forward for helping advance the conversation about how to support local news. Donors can, of course, give money to whoever they want and use whatever words they prefer. But for this project, and at this time in history, I suggest being specific and not muddling the message based on fleeting market research. If Americans are truly tired of hearing the D word and it turns them off to hear journalism is needed to sustain it, maybe we should just start preparing for the F word, the one that ends with M and rhymes with schism. So he's saying, oh, okay, we won't say that news is vital to democracy. We'll say news is vital to fight fascism. So he thinks that calling 40% of the state and half the country fascist is going to be the way to get people to support local news. And it's definitely not elitist or condescending or anything like that. Unreal. No self-awareness. Oh, we're not done with the Seattle Times is trash. As I said, they've spent more time and more news coverage talking about what Donald Trump might do in Seattle in terms of the National Guard or protecting ICE facilities than they've done focusing on all the crises that Seattle has done to itself and the sorry state of certain areas of the city. I mean, they talk about that sometimes, but it's always finding some way to blame non-existent Republicans and conservatives in Seattle for all the woes the city faces. So you'll recall the new police chief in Seattle, Sean Barnes. He was going through his confirmation process. We played this clip on the show, gosh, it's been a few months ago now, where he, of course, he's under questioning from the very leftist members of the city council about what he'll do as the chief of police. If ICE comes into our city and is tearing away our citizens and ruining our life. Here's what he said.
The federal government's decision to bring in the military, and I was a Marine, is not warranted. The Los Angeles Police Department have dealt with protests for a very long time. I can assure you they can handle it. Just like if there are protests in Seattle, we can handle it. We have mutual aid, we have operational plans, and as the young folks would say, we're not new to this. We know how to handle this. And I will do everything in my power, I want to be clear, to protect anyone in Seattle from anyone who comes to this city with the intention to hurt them or inhibit their First Amendment rights. And what that means is, at some point, I will probably go to jail and be in prison, because we have an administration that has threatened to jail politicians, and indeed has done so in Milwaukee, if you remember that, and has threatened to jail a governor. I'm just a simple public servant. That's all I am.
Just a simple public servant. That's all I am. So he's saying he's going to go to jail. And that's what a few months ago when everything was happening in Los Angeles. I'm going to go to jail for this. And he was pretty he went viral in a lot of other areas of the country. He was being criticized. And now he's not only doubling down on those statements, but I would argue saying things that are much worse and call into question his actual ability to enforce the law in the city of Seattle. So this is from the Seattle Times. Seattle's police chief, quote, will not be quiet if National Guard is deployed. And in it, it's all these, virtue signaling remarks from him. It says, should the Trump administration deploy the National Guard to Seattle, Police Chief Sean Barnes knows what he'll say to his officers. I will ask them, does anyone know who Willie Grimes is? Grimes, 20, in 1969, was a sophomore at North Carolina A&T State University in Greensboro. Barnes's alma mater, who, as a bystander, was shot and killed during violent clashes between police, National Guard troops, and students demonstrating against segregation. His killing was never solved, though police were widely blamed for his death. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights was sharply critical of the National Guard's role, calling their armed response reckless and disproportionate. Barnes said in an interview Friday, "My message will be simple, that our responsibility is to protect the constitutional rights of our community, and that includes the right to protest." So again, he's doubling down on this narrative that he is a hero who is willing to get shot and killed for the citizens, not just imprisoned now. A couple months ago, he said he's willing to get imprisoned to fight back against the Trump administration should they deploy the National Guard or troops. And now he's comparing himself to someone who in 1969 was killed, hasn't even ever been solved, so it's not definitive, was killed during a protest at his alma mater, and he's suggesting that he is willing to take a bullet. Now, I would hope that the chief of police is willing to take a bullet for the citizens of Seattle. That's quite literally the job of people who sign up to protect and serve. But in this case, he's making up some artificial scenario where he's so brave and virtuous that if Trump comes here to enforce lawful immigration efforts, he's trying to fearmonger people into believing that he is the police chief, might get killed for it. So it actually gets even worse than this. This was talking about the issue of masking, these ICE agents and federal agents who are wearing masks over their face because they say, and they are being attacked, shot, threatened, doxxed, stalked home. And in this state, and down in Tacoma was a good example, they had pictures and flyers all over the place with the face of ICE agents, their names and addresses. So that's why they're trying to hide their identity, right? Because they don't want people showing up at their homes in this environment to kill them. And that is, in this story, DHS Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin said in response to a Seattle Times report that ICE agents are being stalked and targeted, not just by violent rioters, but dangerous criminals who they work to get off the streets. In response to that, Barnes was skeptical when informed of McLaughlin's statement, quote, "My experience has been that when someone states that something has increased by 1,000%, what it really means is that it never happened." Grasp this for a second. So ICE says there's roughly 1,000% increase in assaults against ICE agents, and that's why they're having to cover their faces. The chief of police in Seattle, a sworn law enforcement officer, is saying, oh, usually when people say something's increased by 1,000%, it didn't happen. So despite all the very public instances of it definitely happening, and shootings, how many people are under federal indictment for the shooting in Texas for it being an organized leftist ambush? We've had pictures of the signs of ICE agents, taken from personal social media profiles, put up on telephone poles with their names and addresses. We've had the assaults. We've had all of that. And a chief of police is saying, yeah, it didn't happen. That's disgusting. That is genuinely disgusting. Now, he can say, look, I don't know if it's been up 1,000%, but there's no doubt that there has absolutely been an uptick. We've seen this happen. But to say it's just outright not happening? What are the men and women of the Seattle Police Department supposed to think of that? Back in 2020, when SPD officers were being assaulted left and right on the streets during the rioting, what had happened if, the FBI came out under Donald Trump and said, it's not happening? It's just wild. I'm shocked that I'm not shocked, but it's unreal he would say something like that. He goes on to say, so there is, Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell is weighing, because he's trying to keep his job and he wants to appease the lefties, he's weighing an ordinance that would ban law enforcement agents wearing masks and covering their faces, which, as you know, is purely performative. The city of Seattle is not able to ban or to dictate what federal law enforcement does. It literally could not enforce an ordinance that would prohibit them from wearing a face mask. They're just doing it to be, performative. Barnes said Seattle officers will not, this is terrifying. Barnes said Seattle officers will not aid the National Guard or Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents in efforts to support the administration's aggressive anti-immigrant policies. What they will do, he said, is ensure Seattle residents are protected from the belligerent tactics that some masked ICE agents have employed in other cities, sometimes with the protection of guardsmen, including assaults on lawful protesters in the media. So what that tells me right there, before I read the rest of this one, Nicole, what that tells me is that he's going to tell his officers, just like what happened in Chicago, that they can't come to the aid of ICE agents who are under attack. Because we already know that they're not going to help with immigration efforts. It's a sanctuary jurisdiction. They're quite literally by law prohibited from helping with immigration efforts, and they never have, since that became a law. So what he's saying is they're not going to aid in efforts, and they're not going to support their belligerent tactics, and they're going to support citizens who are lawfully protesting. I would expect that you support citizens who are lawfully protesting. I support that. I think that is the job of the police department, to make sure that people aren't targeted, hurt, whatever it is, for exercising their First Amendment rights. But we know that's not really what we're talking about here. And you look at what happened in Chicago, where ICE agents were boxed in. A woman had a semi-automatic rifle who'd already previously made death threats to federal agents. And Chicago PD called off its officers to come respond. And we talked on this show. The head of the Seattle Police Officers Guild, Mike Solon, was on this show probably 4 or 5 months ago, saying he was concerned, and he'd reached out proactively to Chief Sean Barnes to ask, hey, are we going to be allowed, when that call comes over that ICE agents are in danger, that their lives are in danger, are we going to have political cover if we respond? Because he said, we're responding anyway. We have to respond. Anybody's life is in danger in the city of Seattle, whether it's a citizen or a federal agent. He says, we're going to respond, but we don't want to be thrown under the bus by politicians after the fact. And he never got a firm response from the chief of police. And now we know why, because the chief of police is saying, we're not coming to help. How can you wear a badge and put on that uniform every day, sir? That is utterly disgusting to me. And I don't know if this is who you really are, or I don't know if it's who you're pretending to be, because you know you serve at the pleasure of a politician in one of the most liberal places in the country. But either way, what a disgusting thing to insinuate, that you would not come to the aid of a federal law enforcement officer who's only doing their job if their life is in danger. And what a disgusting thing to insinuate that their lives aren't in danger, that they haven't been attacked and harassed and doxxed, and that those numbers are just made up by the federal government. He goes on to say, Barnes said SPD would enforce an ordinance if it was passed on this mask ban thing, but suggested the penalties be civil rather than criminal to diminish the possibility of confrontation between federal law enforcement agents and police officers. He said there's an issue of jurisdiction, and there is little our department can do to compel compliance. So at least he understands that. But he said this, Barnes said his research has turned up no policy that requires federal law enforcement officers to identify themselves. So he's, going in there and, saying that we can't technically do this. He goes on to say, nobody should be above the law, not me and not law enforcement from any agency. This is about bringing back some civility to what we're doing. The country stands at a historic point, he said, adding that Seattle can expect its police chief will not be quiet. So, okay, you don't have to be quiet, but we do expect you to be honest, and we do expect you to enforce the law without fear or favor. And I have a really hard time believing that you're going to do that if proactively you're already making the assumption that citizens are going to be peaceful and ICE agents are going to be problematic. Because that's what you're saying, is you think that ICE agents, what was the word that he used, are using belligerent tactics, that they're assaulting lawful protesters in the media, and that they are not actually being harassed and assaulted and doxxed, and therefore there's no reason for them to hide their faces. Probably the most disgusting remarks I've heard from the head of a police department in America ever over anything. And we're supposed to have, for the benefit of the public, there has to still be some working relationship between the Seattle Police Department and the feds, whether it's the FBI or the DEA or ICE or Homeland Security. And so how is the federal government supposed to work with the Seattle Police Department now? And for sure, for the federal government, they should know that the Seattle Police Department is not going to come. If you could be dying on the ground, I believe this now, that a federal agent could be dying on the ground in downtown Seattle and Chief Sean Barnes would say, don't respond. I believe that. I genuinely believe that. He'd say, don't respond. And if he wants to deny that, he can come on this show and he can deny it. Absolutely disgusting. And that's the stuff the Seattle Times is peddling. Why? Because the Seattle Times is straight trash. All right, I gave you your warning. I got to read this perverted book to you coming up next. First, there's a lot happening, obviously, now with the peace deal in the Middle East, what that means for the global economy, that on top of tariffs and the continued threat of tariffs. So what does that mean for your retirement portfolio? Well, get a second opinion. If you're even concerned whatsoever, get a second opinion with our friend Zach Abraham at Bulwark Capital. Go to knowyourriskpodcast.com, knowyourriskpodcast.com. Schedule some time to talk to Zach and his team. They'll do a free risk assessment on your retirement portfolio. They'll share the basic fundamentals of value investing, a perspective on the outlook for the remainder of 2025 and heading into 2026, plus a full reveal of how Bulwark is always looking for opportunities to lower risk, lower cost, and give your retirement as much upside as possible. Go to knowyourriskpodcast.com. That's knowyourriskpodcast.com. You only get one retirement, so we all want to make sure that it's properly protected and that we are on track to have the retirement that we want. All right, ninth graders in the Highline School District, which is in the Burien White Center area, have been assigned a fictional novel called The Book of Unknown Americans. Let's talk about it in our segment, Unbelievable. Okay, so a father got in touch with us as a student at Evergreen High School, again in the White Center area. So ninth graders, these are like 14 to 15-year-olds. I think that's important to keep in mind. So they have their syllabus and some of the books ahead of time that they're going to be reading this year. And one of them is called The Book of Unknown Americans. And this particular book, according to the father, is being read out loud in class. So students and the teacher are kind of taking turns reading aspects and experts of this book out loud in class. Okay, what's the book about? Let's see. Random House introduces the theme of the book as such. Arturo and Ima Rivera have lived their whole lives in Mexico. One day, their beautiful 15-year-old daughter, Maribel, sustains a terrible injury, one that casts doubt on whether she'll ever be the same. And so, leaving all they have behind, the Riveras come to America with a single dream, that in this country of great opportunity and resources, Maribel can get better. Now, even if this book weren't full of perversion, I would also say that it seems to be a very interestingly timed book choice, wouldn't you say? And I'm sure that in the hands of a woke teacher, they will use it as a way to push back against immigration enforcement and try to, I don't know, make it sound like immigration agents are the enemy and these people are just coming here for a better life because their 15-year-old daughters are injured and they just want them to get better. You know what I'm saying? It's an interesting book choice. But upon reading it and apparently this dad was at like a parent-teacher thing or some sort of open house at the school and like saw that this book was going to be taught to his child, and so gets the book, decides to kind of read through the book and finds some very concerning excerpts. So a lot of sexual stuff, and that's the first problem. A lot of sexual stuff. And again, 14, 15-year-olds, we don't know the extent. Our understanding is based on this dad that parents were surprised by this, that they hadn't gotten any sort of warning that, hey, this book is on the syllabus for your child, your ninth grader, and it has some pretty adult sexual content in it, which our argument has been, and that's why we fought for parental rights, that you ought to have a lot of advance notice and an opportunity to opt your child out if themes like this come up. Now, I would also argue that themes like this shouldn't be in a book for ninth graders at all. So I'm going to read just a couple of the... Why does this fall on me? If I'm uncomfortable, imagine kids in a class that are uncomfortable reading this out loud, right? Can you imagine being a ninth grader? My pants got tight. I could sense it, but I didn't care. We just kept kissing, my hand under her scarf, and then my pants were damp and warm. I pulled back. I threw my hands over my crotch and angled my body away from her. Arturo turned off the water, twisting the handle so hard that I thought he would break it. I watched as he picked up his towel from the floor and rubbed himself dry, the hair matted on his barrel chest, his limp penis hanging between his stocky legs. Okay. Let's keep going, Nicole. She's a good lay. I bet she is. I bet you can do whatever you want to a girl like that. I've been thinking about all the things I could do to her. Tell her to take my clothes off. Have her suck my D. Yeah, D-I-C-K. Got it. 9th graders reading this out loud. He shimmied me closer and buried his face in my neck. I spread my fingers through his hair, feeling the warmth of his scalp, the faint scratch of his mustache against my skin. And by the time he pushed himself inside me, I believed that even after everything, even after the accident and having traveled so far, leaving behind the landscape that we had woken up to every morning our whole lives, blah, 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 blah. Which also creeps me out because you're talking about a teenage girl and some dude with a mustache pushing himself inside of her. This one, to me, is the most problematic for a variety of reasons. But again, it has to do with my concern over the theme of the book at this particular juncture in America. It talks about what immigrants have gone through to come to the United States. It says half of them ended up dead or burned up so bad that when someone finds them, their skin is black and their lips are cracked open. Another half of them drown in rivers. And half after that are picked up by La Migra and sent back to where they came from, or beaten or arrested. The women raped in the ASS. So La Migra is immigration enforcement. Half of them ended up dead or burned up so bad that when someone finds them, their skin is black and their lips are cracked open. Another half of them drowning in rivers. And half after that, picked up by La Migra and sent back to where they came from, or beaten or arrested. The women raped in the ASS. So this book, a work of fiction, being read by 9th graders at this particular time in American history, talks about immigration agents, ICE, anally raping women. And this is being read by 9th graders in a school district south of Seattle. So the father reached out to the school district to complain, as he should, and I'm glad that he did that. And they basically made all these excuses like, we're going to look into this, we're going to look into whether this is appropriate, and also said, oh, not all of the book is being read out loud. So you expect me to believe that in one of the wokest school districts in the state, they're skipping over these parts about how immigration agents are raping women? And it's like, this isn't a one-off. How many books like this have been discovered by parents in the bottom of their kid's backpack or on their child's syllabus, and when the parent reads it, they're absolutely mortified, and then they send it to us and we tell it? I mean, and all grades. Remember the book that was read to, was it kindergartners or 4th graders? I think it was somewhere in elementary school, where it's like, when you're born, a doctor guesses what your gender is. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. I mean, this is the kind of insane stuff being pushed on kids. No wonder we've got kids walking out of class to protest immigration enforcement, because they're reading a book in 9th grade that says that immigration agents are raping women. Unbelievable. All right, I want to talk about the interview we had on Sundays with subscribers yesterday. Awesome whistleblower who is such a fighter and champion for ending radical gender ideology being pushed on kids. We'll have an excerpt of that interview coming up. First, I've encouraged you guys to take the First Mark Challenge because we all need insurance. Why not have somebody else handle it for you? Make sure you have the best insurance. Only are paying for insurance you need and have the best possible price. That's what our friends at First Mark Insurance can do. FirstMarkInsurance.com. FirstMarkInsurance.com. The very best part is they're working for you, not the insurance companies. And you never pay First Mark anything for their services, so there really is no downside to taking the First Mark Challenge. I mean, they might come back and say, as they have with some undivided viewers who've taken it, hey, actually, the insurance you have right now is great. We can't even beat that price, so I'd stick with it. But they're always going to, even if it means turning your business away, they're going to do what's best for you and your family. But for me, I've now been a member of the First Mark family for 3 years. Undivided is insured through First Mark, and it's not because they're a sponsor. It's because they took a lot of stress off our plate, made sure we had the best insurance, and that we were not paying more for it than we needed to. So FirstMarkInsurance.com, FirstMarkInsurance.com. The very best part is they work for you, not the insurance company. So they will always have your best interest in mind. All right, a very timely interview we had on Sundays with subscribers. So we're, of course, talking a ton about radical gender ideology, the need to get it out of our schools, and also the need to stop So we've got the two initiatives that are happening right now. One of them to keep boys out of girls' sports, the other one to restore parental rights so that the school can't convince your kid that they're transgender and then hide a transition from you by installing these medical clinics at school, which they're doing more and more frequently. We just had a story on it last week. So one of the OG whistleblowers on the issue of the medicalization of kids is a woman named Jamie Reed. She wrote an article in the Free Press back in February of 2023. The headline, "I thought I was saving trans kids. Now I'm blowing the whistle." And Jamie's sort of leftist bona fides cannot be questioned. And I think that's what makes her such a powerful whistleblower in this regard. This is a lesbian who was married at the time she wrote this article to a trans dude. So a woman who had totally transitioned to try to appear as a man. And Jamie describes herself as being so far left that she even at one point in her life lived at an anarchist collective, okay? So this is, as she's living in St. Louis, that's where the clinic she was at was. She's so far left, she lived in an anarchist collective. Said like she was left of Bernie Sanders, lesbian, married to a chick who was transgender, thought they were a dude. So like this is someone who, in theory, if they're thinking logically, the left can't discount. Because they can't say, oh, it's a right-wing, Nazi, bigot, fascist, whatever it is. So Jamie started working at this gender clinic. And it only took, within the span of a couple years, even though she, at the beginning of it, absolutely bought into all of it, hook, line, and sinker. Yes, kids can be trans. Yes, we should refer them for surgeries. Within a couple years, she started to realize that what was happening there was absolutely horrific.
The doctors that I worked with would go and be on the side of the parent who wanted to medically transition the child.
Who would affirm. Wow.
Yep. There was actually a case where one of the doctors in the gender center was awarded medical decision making by a judge.
Wow. Wow.
Over parents.
Wow.
And the minute that custody order came down, she emailed me and said, okay, we can give them testosterone now. And I was so appalled at the idea that a judge would give away a parental right like that, not to a gender clinician. I actually sent the agreement off to legal and I just said, can somebody please just tell me that we're actually going to do this?
Yeah, and that was one of the moments that she started to be like, something is wrong here. I mean, she said the other thing is the kids weren't improving. You know, they would send them for medicalization or hormone therapy or whatever it is, and nothing was changing, nothing was improving in the kids' lives by transing them. So this person who was married to a trans person, you know, member of the LGBTQ plus community, hardcore leftist, just starts to slowly wake up. So at first, Jamie says, like, I'm just going to quit the job. I'm going to transfer to a different area where I don't have to partake in this horror that I've now seen. But she said even after she did that and separated herself from it, she just couldn't sleep at night.
I tried to walk away and I couldn't sleep at night. I kept thinking about the kids that I had basically just abandoned. I felt like abandoned to the wolves. I was still in really close contact with the nurse and I just kept hearing that nothing was changing, nothing was changing, nothing was changing. And then I read an article by one Admiral Rachel Richard Levine.
Yeah.
And he wrote in this, or was quoted in this, saying, well, all of the gender centers in the United States are doing excellent work. Everybody goes through this really rigorous, scientifically based, evidence-based process. And I just read this and I was just like, well, that's absolutely not true.
Yeah.
And I know that that's not true. And that really kind of tipped me over to, I couldn't stay silent.
Yeah. What did you believe the punishments would be and the risk would be for coming forward?
I had a really good team around me before this was ever published.
Yeah.
And one of the things I was told that I needed to reckon with was the idea that I could go to jail, that I could be sending
jail
the doctors that I worked with to jail.
For what? It was legal, was it not?
There are elements in this that get into some of the fraudulent aspects. There were violations that I was a part of.
Do you think you belonged in jail then? Do you think you still belong in jail?
There are days when I believe that I harmed kids.
Yeah, that's a pretty profound thing. And, for that reason, though, I think it gives her a lot of credibility. Not only her background, where she came at this from, being married at the time to someone who is transgender, buying into it at the beginning, and then realizing, seeing it firsthand, that this was so horrible for kids and it was just hurting them. Ultimately, she also, by the way, believes it hurts adults who transition even in adulthood, even if that's their, decision to do so. And then for her to say, I probably belong in jail. That's a stunning admission, that she believes that some of what they did there was so bad that some of them belonged in jail for it. Now, because of the article that she wrote now 2 years ago in the Free Press, actually the state of Missouri ended up banning this kind of gender care, and this clinic was closed down, but banning this kind of gender care for minors. And now what she's done is she's going across the country trying to help other states like Washington State and blue states make gains. She's we've talked about on the show before, the LGB Courage Coalition. Highly recommend you checking out what they're doing. But we, after we did the interview, we got an opportunity last night to do a very intimate dinner with her and some other moms, school board members, coaches, concerned citizens, just to talk about and strategize, how do we break through this radical gender ideology? And I think that's where it starts, is talking about it. Coming out, the number of lesbians who were at this dinner with us last night who have had enough, and they're the most effective messengers, because it's not somebody who can just say, they're right wing, coming from some place of hate and bigotry or whatever it is. They're people like Jamie who have seen the harms of this firsthand. So I think a lot of this starts with just being honest about it, even if it's in quiet with a group of friends and an intimate group of friends. But the reason I say it was really timely is actually last night, John Oliver, the comedian, bashed Jamie Reed on his show. And I'm thinking, for what? For what? This is her personal lived experience. Doesn't the left love lived experience? Only lived experience that agrees with their worldview. And so here he's bashing this woman who has done nothing more than try to live her authentic life and, change her mind as more evidence presented itself. And they're so married to this radical gender ideology that he would vilify her? For what? It's wild. I got so many compliments on this interview, not on my part of it, obviously on her part of it. If you want to watch the full thing, it is up now for paid subscribers. Go to undividedpod.com. If you're not a subscriber, undividedpod.com, click on the banner that says support the show. You can also do a one-time purchase of any of our Sundays with subscribers episodes on Patreon, so that's an option as well. All right. So speaking of radical gender ideology, this is something that came up at this intimate dinner we were at last night, where I think the time is over to sort of be passive about the way that we approach it and really turn everything on its head. For a while it's been, you're an evil, horrible person if you don't support, trans people and radical gender ideology and boys competing against girls and kids getting the health care they need to affirm their gender. And we're often on our heels trying to, dig ourselves out of this label that's been given to us that we're a bunch of bigots. We have to flip it. And we have to start demanding to know from these people, wait a second, you support boys playing against girls? Wait a second, you support a 14-year-old having their healthy breasts cut off? Yes or no? And that actually is a dynamic that has flipped in Virginia during the governor's race. So I'll get to the question. So of course, this has taken on a new meaning because this is Jay Jones stuff. So the attorney general candidate on the Democratic side in Virginia is the guy who sent those weird text messages like talking about wanting to shoot a political rival, a Republican, in the head, and hoped his kids would have to watch him die and that his kids would die because they're little Nazis or whatever. And so the Jay Jones issue has also started to cloud the gubernatorial race, which is between Democrat Abigail Spanberger and Republican Winsome Earl Sears. And so there was a debate. It's the only debate in the race between the two of them. I'll get to the radical gender stuff in a moment. But there was this the whole debate was horrible for the Democrat. So the Republican and the moderators, I give the moderators a lot of credit, they were trying to pin down Abigail Spanberger on whether she still supports Jay Jones despite the text that he sent out. So here's part of that debate.
Will you continue to endorse Jay Jones to be the next Attorney General of Virginia? And were you aware of these text messages before they released? You have 30 seconds.
In fact, it appears that it was those who released the text messages and held them for years. So the public was unaware who had knowledge of these text messages for many years.
What did you do about it?
I learned of these text messages the day that they came out, and I denounced them as soon as I learned of them.
She denounces murder.
And importantly, at this point, as we move forward, the voters now have this information that was withheld for them.
You're running to
presumably for political reasons. But the voters now have the information, and it is up to voters to make an individual choice based on this information.
Ms. Spanberger, I understand what you're saying about the voters, but for you yourself, do you still continue to endorse Jay Jones? 15 seconds, yes or no?
We are all running our individual races. I believe my opponent has said that about her lieutenant governor nominee.
Ms. Earl Sayers.
And it's up to every person to make their own decision. I am running my race to serve Virginia, and that is what I intend to do.
Thank you, Ms. Spanberger. We just want to clarify, what you're saying is that as of now, you still endorse Jay Jones as Attorney General.
I'm saying as of now, it's up to every voter to make their own individual decision. I am running for governor. I am accountable for the words that I say, for the acts that I take, for the policies that I have put out.
Thank you.
I am responsible for the policies I put out and the work I will endeavor to do tirelessly for the people of Virginia.
Thank you, Ms. Spanberger.
Wow. I mean, I never get who pushes that strategy on political candidates. Having been a moderator in gubernatorial debates, it is far better for you, even if it's an unpopular answer, for you to just say, yeah, I do, and then move on. Now it becomes this 5-minute clip where you've shown that you have no credibility, incapable of answering a simple question. And at the end of it, people still know that your answer is yes. Because if the answer were no, you would just say it, right? So I don't know who tells political candidates to just go with the dance around it strategy. But that moment led to one of the most powerful political ads I've ever seen that was put together by Earl Sears' campaign.
Would it take him pulling the trigger? Is that what would do it? And then you would say he needs to get out of the race? Abigail, you have nothing to say? Abigail, what if he said it about your 3 children? Is that when you would say he should get out of the race, Abigail? You're running to be governor.
Ms. Earl Sears.
I mean, we're talking about murder. We're talking about someone's life being taken from them. Have you nothing to say about that? Are you not going to address it? Really, you can't go any further. You're a governor. You're supposed to stand up for all the people. Are you saying political murder is all right? Have some political courage. What you have done is you are taking political calculations about your future as governor. Well, as governor, you have to make hard choices, and that means telling Jay Jones to leave the race.
Man, that is a devastating political ad, but she brought it upon herself. So back to my comments about men and women's spaces, which is a common sense thing, right? And that's why are we on the defensive? Why have we allowed ourselves to be put on the defensive on this issue? It's because the left is far more strategic about labeling and vilifying and getting out in front of things. We shouldn't be the ones on the defensive. Anyone who supports men in women's spaces should be the ones on the defensive. And Abigail Spanberger found herself during this debate on the defensive on that question.
Once again, the question was, should transgender girls who are biological males be allowed to use girls' bathrooms and play on girls' sports teams in K through 12? You have 15 seconds to clarify.
In cases across Virginia, I think it's incumbent upon parents and educators and administrators in each local community to make decisions locally.
Would you rescind the Youngkin administration policy requiring boys and girls to use bathrooms aligning with their biological sex? You have 30 seconds.
My priority would be to ensure that local communities, importantly parents and teachers and educators, are able to work together to meet the unique needs of each school and each community.
But Ms. Spanberger, the question was, would you rescind the Youngkin administration policy requiring boys and girls to use bathrooms aligning with their biological sex? You have 15 seconds to clarify that question.
Yes, and my answer is that in each local community, decisions should be made between parents and educators and teachers in each community. It shouldn't be dictated by politicians.
I mean, that's stunning. Her failure is stunning. But that is a dynamic that we really haven't seen in a debate of that magnitude before. That she's the one who supported those policies, who is put on the defensive to have to come out and say in the affirmative, yes, I want men and women's spaces. And look how uncomfortable she is at the prospect of having to admit that. That's a shift. That's a change. And it wasn't just at the debate. She did a local news interview the very next day, and the anchor brought up the fact that she, doesn't seem willing to commit to an answer on it.
What do you make of Earl Sears's claim that you're fine with, quote, putting men in girls' locker rooms?
The reality is that the federal government has the ability to change the letter of the law, right? Through Congress, through the Senate, bills go to the president's desk. And at the end of the day, we have a president of the United States who is taking away and threatening federal funding. The president doesn't have the ability to just pull back funding. And it isn't just to these public schools. It is to our research institutions. It's for cancer research. The real challenge that exists here is that we have a president who is using congressionally approved federal spending as a cudgel. And just as an issue of principle, right now it's coming after the schools. Before it was coming after conservation programs. Understanding the implementation of how it is that, our kids are coexisting in the classroom or on the sports field. Yes, I do think that in many cases, it's the local community that knows their community best and can readily make decisions and provide guidance about how to ensure that all our kids are safe.
Wow. Total word soup, but it's a bigger moment than that. It really is a shift. And even the local news media, and I'm not saying the Seattle media is like the media in Virginia, things are bluer here, but the fact that, the Seattle media won't even touch that issue most of the time. And so the fact that she's so on her heels, so on the defensive, because now it's being spun as the unreasonable, even the way he asked that. What would you say about the claims that you want men in women's spaces? Now you're the unreasonable one. And that's what we have to do every single day at every opportunity we can. We flip the script on them. It's like, wait a second. You're telling me you support men in women's spaces? Make them seem like the unreasonable outliers, because they are, right? With the fringe ideology and fringe views. So whether it's at a school board, we have an election coming up. Whether it's a school board meeting, a city council meeting, or a school board forum, a city council forum, even in a city like Seattle. If you have an opportunity as a citizen to ask that question of someone who wants to represent you in any capacity, I don't even care if it's a hospital district. I stopped and talked to a guy, well, I didn't mean to, but he was sign waving where I live on a corner. I was at a stoplight on my way to yoga, and he was running for a hospital district. And I said, hey, said some pleasantries. And I said, the only thing I don't like about the hospital is I went there the other day and there was a form at check-in with like 90 different genders on it. And he goes, oh, I hate that. And I was like, okay, you have my vote. So I think just putting them on the defensive to justify, and even if they do, even if she had come out and said, yes, I support men in women's spaces, then we have him on the record for in the eventuality, and it's imminent, that becomes an untouchable policy position, because it will. So we want every single Democrat, Independent, Republican on the record. Where do you stand on this today? Because it is going to matter and it is going to be important. So I love to see that happening in Virginia, that issue taking center stage. We'll get to our daily show poll and comments coming up next. First, a reminder to join me at the Engage Conference, which is coming up quick, October 22nd and 23rd at the Maidenbauer Center in Bellevue. I've already heard from a lot of you who will be in attendance. I'll be hosting a panel talking about how the media covers housing policy and some other issues in the state of Washington. My friend Jonathan Cho, friends Jonathan Cho and Alex Hayes will be there. So please join us. And there's a ton of other good speeches and panel discussions happening at Engage. So even if you're, let's say you're a landlord or a builder or a developer, this is right up your alley. But even if you're just kind of a political nerd or you want to learn more about some of the policies that are happening in the state of Washington or that might come up this session, sign up for Engage. Go to rhawa.org. Get engaged. Get it? rhawa.org. No, Nicole's like, yeah, we do. rhawa.org. And while you're there, if you are a small to mid-sized landlord in the state of Washington, make sure you become a member of RHA. They're down in Olympia helping fight back against some of these unreasonable housing policies. All right, let's get to our daily subscriber show poll on Patreon, Locals, and X. I asked you all how confident you are that the Middle East peace deal brokered between Israel and Hamas with the help of President Trump will hold. Are you very confident? Are you somewhat confident? Or are you not confident at all? Nicole, what say you?
Well, I'm somewhat. I'm not super educated on the Middle East, but I'm somewhat confident because I think that at this point, Trump would take them out.
Yeah.
I think that we have the alive people back. And at this point, if they decide to piss off Donald Trump, they'll be obliterated.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
And I just think they're not going to risk that. But
I'm actually going to say I'm very confident because of the buy-in from other leaders in the Middle East. I don't believe that Hamas can afford to be on an island that is that solitary. And I also don't know that they would have agreed in the manner they did to this phase if they weren't committed to it. Now, is Israel committed to it? I would hope so. I don't think Netanyahu would all of a sudden break a deal with the president because that would be very, very, very bad for him. And you saw how joyous the people in Israel are and were at the news. So I'm actually going to say, very. Now, do I think that we're going to have full-on everlasting peace in the Middle East? Probably not. At some point, something's going to go amiss. But for now, yeah, I'm very confident that it's going to hold.
I think there's a generational thing, so it's going to have to weed itself out, right? So it'll take some to change hearts and minds, right? So it'll take some generations to really find true peace.
And I don't believe that, if some individual bad actors act up, that negates the peace deal as a whole. So I think people just can't be very reactive.
I guess my hesitation comes from Ari because he's so educated, but then I also think their hesitation comes from it feels unreal.
Yeah, 100%. Most of you, 70%, are saying somewhat. 25% though saying not at all, which is, not at all.
Wow.
Only a small percentage saying very. GTBdo says very hopeful for this peace deal to last. Depends on how Hamas complies. Diana, they have been close so many times before, only for something to go awry. I truly hope this one holds. Y says, I have somewhat of hope because President Trump is not afraid to bring fists down and not be a doormat, which is kind of what Nicole said, is that, I think he's shown that he's a president who will do what he threatens to do. Can you imagine Kamala Harris trying to work her way through all this? Oh, my God. Oh, my gosh. Josiah, you're making a peace treaty with a group that both culturally and religiously accepts the murder of non-believers. For genuine long-term peace to be possible, you'd have to change the entire religious structure of the culture. And I think that you make some good points there for sure. Jeremy, there have been wars in the Middle East in one form or another since the beginning of time. Nothing will change. And that is true, that this would be quite the outlier. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm just going to stick by my very because I just already said it and I feel like I can't take it back. Mary818, for a season, maybe. Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, etc. The long game is their mission. They will bide their time and work behind the scenes. In the meantime, they will work to destabilize the U.S. and Northern European countries. They will partner with China and Russia. This will all come around again. I actually think that this makes it more likely for a deal between Russia and Ukraine. I guess Vladimir Zelensky is going to be at the White House on Friday. But Russia, I think that Putin wants to be accepted on the national stage, right? And now he sees all these Middle East leaders who are cozying up to Trump, and he probably feels like a little left out, and especially the way Trump talks about it, when he's in Egypt, is we're all going to share in this wonderful success and the riches and all of and they're going to be business minded. And so here's, Vladimir looking like a dumbass out there spending all his nation's money on a war that isn't going anywhere. So I actually think that this will help bring about, hopefully, an end to the conflict in Ukraine.
Yeah.
So Wild stuff. Well, I'm glad you guys are optimistic about what's to come. All right, we'll get to comments on Trump's peace deal. Old sub sailor, the Dems always conflate authoritarianism with law and order. They just don't respect the rule of law. That is such a good point. They do hate the rule of law, and them saying that Trump's an authoritarian because he wants to enforce the law, that really is. They absolutely are conflating those two things. Because if the issue was the immigration enforcement, then you should be mad that that law is on the books. You should be advocating for an end to the rules around legal immigration. But they're not, because that's stupid and would be unpopular. So instead, they just call Trump an authoritarian. Let's see, I'm going to butcher your name, but I will try my best. Divyanshi. Historic peace deal under Trump barely gets attention, but the media has time to whine about losing readers while putting out half-baked reporting. ICE controversies, gender policies, it's all noise. People are waking up. And I will say, the historic peace deal got a ton of play, obviously, across all the networks. But I think entities like the Seattle Times, so obsessed with Orange Man bad, can't give him credit for anything, and can't focus on the actual failures of Democrats is certainly a problem.
I know we featured MSNBC, but I was watching CNN last night, and theirs was a little different because I felt like I was watching a news station. They reported on Air Force One landing. They reported on the excitement that President Trump was there. They acted excited that he was there. I mean, it was like they didn't have any grudges against him. They were just reporting on what was happening and a historic moment. It was like they were a news station, like I said.
It's a hard one to spin. It's a pretty hard one to spin.
Yeah.
Let's see. Kruse, Brandi, are you going to ask the Seattle Times for a retraction on their story about you? No, I already tweeted at them. I went for public shaming this time. Sheila, hey, at least the Seattle Times gives you a free advertisement. Yeah, that's true.
I know they do mention the podcast at least.
Yeah, Mark Carnes, I canceled my subscription to the Times last week, telling them I can't take reading their leftist writers anymore. Good for you, Mark.
Well done.
Good for you. We need to start a crusade to get people to cancel and tell them they are too far left to take. They will change once they start losing more money. There are a lot of people like me who have subscribed forever that are aggravated and will cancel if pushed to think about it logically. I agree. I think it's one of those things you keep kind of passively, and you might just get the notifications and not think much about it. On the Seattle PD chief vowing to fight Trump, Jack says Sean Barnes is an absolute clown. Let's see here. Rich West. Portland is simply put an unchecked anarcho-tyranny that always has a layer of malice and danger right below the surface, despite the colorful characters and costumes. Yeah, all these little Antifa goons are now putting on those inflatable costumes because they want the news media to do exactly what the news media is doing. Like, oh, Trump says that these are terrorists, but look at them. They're just in inflatable, fun costumes. That's exactly. They think naked. They know you're that dumb. You did exactly what they wanted you to do with that. It's just crazy.
Did you see the nakedness?
They're probably going having some gross furry convention after the fact. What was that?
God. The naked.
Oh, the naked bike ride.
Oh my gosh. I love all the agents on the building that were just like taking pictures with their phone.
They're just like
you are ridiculous. You're ridiculous.
Oh my God, it's just too much. Let's see. On the Highline, 9th graders being assigned to pornographic reading. Tanya, if they can't shut this down, the students need to band together and file a sexual harassment suit against the teacher in the district. If you speak these words to a random coworker, they can file sexual harassment on you because it is sexual harassment. At the very least, and I understand, 9th grader, as a 9th grader, was I like an innocent flower who didn't know anything about, naked sex and how? Of course not, right? Naked sex. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just saying,
as opposed to the clothes.
Yes, well, whatever. They're not these innocent little kids. And I'm not saying they can't be exposed to any sort of adult themes, but something like this is clearly above and beyond, and parents shouldn't be surprised by it. There should be no surprise from parents what your kids are reading, and there should be a dialogue that's constructive and happens before kids are reading this stuff out loud.
I don't know if I told this story before when we talked about an obnoxious book, but I remember having to read Romeo and Juliet, and really all they do in that book is kiss, right? But I had to read the kissing scene and out loud, and the guy that was reading Romeo that day just happened to be the guy that I had the biggest crush on.
Oh no.
And so I'm already like a terrible out loud reader. Yeah. And it was the most embarrassing day of my life. And I can't imagine asking a child to read some of this. I mean, those were all of the mostly terrible. The one sex scene was the girl, but the rest of them were you're talking about parents taking showers together. You're talking about, typically you don't want to picture your parents doing things like that, or like, you don't want to picture yourself as this girl and then relate to this girl and then her parents thinking about each other in all of these sexual ways. Like, it's just so disturbing.
You didn't even highlight this part. I raised his hand to my lips, closing my mouth around his thumb, waiting to see if he would protest. I sucked each of his fingers one by one while he watched, and then I climbed on top of him and straddled his lap.
I wasn't the highlighter, sorry.
That reads like a sex book a stay-at-home mom would read when she's bored. Does it not?
Yeah, smut.
It's smut. It reads like something an adult would read and be like, ooh, you know? Not for children. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yes, that's ridiculous. And so, I remember the cover to that book was quite innocent looking.
Just a little girl with a little
just remember, and that was a syllabus. That book was listed in the syllabus, and the dad had to sign the syllabus. Like, yep, I've seen all the things they're going to read. So he would have signed that thinking, oh, that looks like an innocent book. I mean, the title doesn't even, seem to be suggestive in any way. And so I think that that's just a reminder. Look into every book.
Right.
And if you just Google that book and say for children, AI tells you, no, it's not for children.
But also they should, because now you're putting it on parents. There's like 6 or 8 books in this. Now you're putting it on parents to take their time to go through all of these books for gross stuff like that. And I get it. But also teachers and schools should say, hey, this has explicit themes. Here are some of the themes in it that you ought to know about. But they don't do it. They hope they can slip it past parents, and parents don't have enough time to look into it and figure it out. So good for this dad.
All obsessed.
Good for this dad. They're obsessed with sex, and it's just crazy. Let's see. More on that. Elemental says, I really hope my kids would tell me if they're exposed to this. Imagine never being told it exists. Joe Dutchman, this is traumatizing me like the Portland nude bike ride drama. Yes, Portland nude bike ride trauma is quite traumatizing. On the Virginia governor's race, John Thomas corrected me. He says, those texts from Jay Jones weren't weird. They're psychotic. I agree. Weird is not an appropriate descriptor, so my apologies. They were psychotic. And violent. Your boy, Roy Boy, unbelievable. It's dangerous to have people like Abigail in power. She's just at the very core a coward, obviously. She has answers to those questions, but she doesn't want to give them. Papa Woody, what is the deadline to get these petitions in? Gosh, I'm sure beginning of December. They just have to be in by like the end of December before the session starts. So I always tell people, get them in as soon as you can. Yeah. But I believe the deadline for you to mail them in so that they can be counted in time will probably be, a couple weeks before Christmas. So just keep that in mind. All right, we'll get to our closing sanity check coming up next. First, thank you, Nicole. Yeah. If you're thinking about selling your home, reach out to our friend Wes Jones at sellwithwes.com. Sellwithwes.com. Wes and his team, marketing really is what they do best, and it matters. If you're like me, sometimes you're on your little app and you're scrolling through listings, just doing some window shopping for homes that you'll never buy and can't afford. I cannot be the only one who does that. But I'll tell you, I've looked at enough listings where I can tell you Wes Jones and his team at Wes Jones & Associates, their listings stand out. You see it, you're immediately like, I want to click on that. Between their photos, their videos, their immersive tours, all that stuff matters. Because if your home is properly showed off, properly displayed, you're going to get more people there in the door. More feet in the door means more offers on the table. So that's a big part of it. And it's not just window dressing. I mean, the last thing you want is to have your listing look great and then people show up and it doesn't look anything like your house. No, Wes is going to make sure your home is properly prepared for sale. And that includes their Listing Boost concierge service, where they'll come in, he'll do an assessment, let you know if he thinks there are some cosmetic upgrades that are worth it to do before your home is listed. And he can even manage those projects, help you pay for them up front, or you just pay for them at closing, which is also a huge burden off of your shoulders. So sellwithwes.com, sellwithwes.com. It really just is a better way to sell your home. And with that, let's get to our closing sanity check. Love Scott Jennings, who of course is one of the only sane people who goes on CNN, but he just nails it with this, because I've been saying we need to get away from this idea of talking about radical gender ideology or treating it as a culture war issue, because it's not. It's really a barometer of something much more significant.
If I can't trust you not to put a boy in a teenage girl's locker room, how will I ever listen to your plan for taxes and the economy?
Right.
I will not, because I've already concluded you're a lunatic.
Yeah.
Exactly. I do not care what other ideas you have. If you think that men should be in women's sports, or you think men belong in women's spaces, or men are biologically no different than women, well, you're a lunatic, and I'm not going to listen to your ideas on anything else. That has been our closing sanity check. That has been today's episode of Undivided, and that's some good homework for you. Put someone on the spot today. Email your elected leader. Email somebody running for school board saying, hey, I'm thinking about voting for you, but what's your position on this? That's a simple thing. Thinking about voting for you, but what is your position on boys and girls sports? Simple. Let's put them on the defensive to actually take a stand on these things. And they know that that's not an easy stand for them to take because it's not a popular position. All right. Please support our show. You know, we need your support. We exist because of paid subscribers who are sick of the mainstream news. So go to undividedpod.com, undividedpod.com, and just click on the banner that says support the show for $5. We make it super simple. Ban Juloon says Brandi has better hair than most Mormon gals. Do Mormons have particularly nice hair? Is that a thing? I've never heard that, but thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, they do like to grow it long.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. All right. See you guys tomorrow. Back here, same time, same place.